Hello and welcome to this thing I'm trying to do in KSP, which is running a fictional space agency in JNSQ. Not stock, not realism overhaul, JNSQ, which is a balance between the two. In that intro sequence, you saw me select two contracts of the, basically max. We can only select two at a time, as of right now at least. Now, as you can see right now, we are building the launch vehicle for our first launch, which will be named Destiny 1. The launch vehicle in question is named, Destiny. Now, a little backstory behind this agency, fictional, is that the government has decided it's time to put their presence into space, or it's time to get a presence in space. So they've hired a ton of engineers who either worked in Germany or were just general engineers for the maybe not United States of America, but maybe United States of America or any other country. Who knows? But they've been hired to make rockets. Now, a few years prior to 1960, which is where this all starts, they began building all these facilities. And Destiny 1 was one of the things they started building. It wasn't a facility, but it was more a rocket. They wanted to get ready by the time they were done. And by goodness, it would impress them. January 1st, 1960. Destiny 1 sits on the launch pad. With the seconds counting down, Mission Control calls ignition, and the clamps release and lift off of Destiny 1. Destiny 1 lifts off from the pad and its engine roars loudly. It begins a pitch program to clear itself of the pad, but not too aggressively that it would spiral out of control. Mission Control continues to monitor the flight as it continues on. The flight continues pitching as expected, so that way if any emergency are to occur, it can try and get itself on a splashdown trajectory, or if not, at least a coastal crash. Sorry. It continues pitching downrange, and as it gets higher and higher, it pitches more and more. Mission Control monitors all these control inputs and calls a go on them. And Destiny 1 begins to get out of the atmosphere and pass into what is essentially space at this point. Destiny 1 pitches over 90 degrees, so it can just increase horizontal speed instead of vertical. And as the G's begin to build up, MECO occurs, and the engine shuts down. Mission Control requests a telemetry report from one of the two guidance units on top of Destiny, and they get that report as soon as possible. Then Mission Control gives the go for the separation of the Destiny probe from the rocket after receiving the telemetry report. And successfully, the probe releases and deploys its antennas. Mission Control expects it to last through re-entry and possibly splash down. Recovery forces are waiting at that splashdown zone. While still in space, the Destiny 1 probe grabs as much data as it can and much scientific information as it can for future flights of more probes. It grabs all the data it really needs and all the data Mission Control can get at the time. Destiny 1 slowly creeps up to its apogee, or its highest point, which is reported to be 102 kilometers, or 1,002 meters, sorry. And as the sun sets, Destiny 2 begins going onto a re-entry path. Slowly but surely, it creeps towards the atmosphere, and it hits the atmosphere. Or almost hits, but it hits the atmosphere and begins diving deeper and deeper into the atmosphere. Again, Mission Control is expecting for this probe to survive. But unfortunately, their expectations would soon crumble. As recovery forces watch and wait for the flames that are expected from the re-entry trail of this probe, Mission Control gets heat warnings at their consoles saying that the probe is getting too hot. And then all of a sudden, The recovery forces notice a breakup. 2 breakups, actually. Both are assumed to be the probe and the rocket. Unfortunately, Mission Control is disappointed and calls the mission a partial success. Now, on to Destiny 2. So after the partial success that was Destiny 1, we've completed our first launch contract, which means now we're 1 of 2 contracts done. We haven't gotten the collect science from Kerbin's surface contract yet, but that's because we kind of messed it up and didn't revert the flight, or recover the flight at least. There's no reverting, to collect the science that was on the vessel at the time. Destiny 2 plans to accomplish that, and then also plans to accomplish the next contract, the radiation belt. Destiny 2 plans to pass the radiation belt, which will give Photon Space Agency insight into what's out there and what could be dangerous to Kerbals. It could definitely plan future missions. Now we're seeing Destiny 2. It's basically going to be the same as Destiny 1 with a slight modification. But basically, in short, there's going to be no differences to Destiny 2. Except there will be something added. We will be adding inside the mystery goo containment unit, which will be responsible for collecting the surface data from Kerbin. Now, of course, here we were thinking about changing out the inner stage, so it's not just a probe core and then a second inner stage, but we realized it's kind of only the best option for this probe in particular, so we decided to keep it, and hey, it works as a backup, so they both can do guidance as well as each other, so they both work in equal parts. So now we're putting the mystery goo containment unit under the fairing that protects the top of the tanks. It'll be on top of those tanks. And with Destiny 2 looking good and no additional modifications needed, I think it's about time Mission Control launches Destiny 2. January 4th, 1960, with Destiny 2 having been in the hangar, it is time that it gets rolled out and launched. So, same launch sequence as last time, except this time, Destiny 2 will be flying more of a straight-up path to get to the radiation belt. Mission Control assumes that the radiation belt starts as 500 kilometers, and so anything under they would deem a failure or partial success as they're still testing the probe. With a slight pitch commanded, Destiny 2 goes on its way, climbing higher and higher through the atmosphere, same as Destiny 1. The pitch this time is little to none, as to keep it on a straight-up trajectory to make sure it passes the radiation belt. Destiny 2 continues upwards, passing through the atmosphere with a constant engine firing and basically no throttle downs, causing stresses on the craft unforeseen. Of course, Mission Control is concerned about these stresses until main engine cut off. Main engine finally cuts off and the stresses are relieved. But the apogee isn't as high as they expected. It's only 492 kilometers. They separate the probe, albeit disappointingly, thinking that they haven't passed the radiation belt whatsoever. This mission would be deemed a partial success if Mission Control wasn't about to be met with a surprise. But hey, if the mission had not been a success, they would have broken an altitude record, so that's good. This probe begins a slow thermal control roll to make sure that one side doesn't get too hot, one side doesn't get too cold, albeit it's not simulated in this. But they still do it anyways to make sure it won't get too hot or cold in its time and space. The probe climbs as the numbers increase, and Mission Control is, of course, still disappointed that they didn't pass the 500 kilometer mark, which is what they were expecting to be the start of the radiation belt. Of course, they can study higher space while they're doing this, so that can help prove for future missions. It climbs slowly through the blackness of space and closes in on its apogee. But then, all of a sudden, a mission control person gets a reading, a spike in radiation. They've passed the radiation belt. As their devices get weaker and weaker, Mission Control celebrates as they realize that the radiation belt starts way earlier than they had actually expected, and is excited to bring this data back for inspection. And of course, as expected, the probe comes back down from space and re-enters the atmosphere, with of course Mission Control now knowing that it wouldn't survive. So the rocket and the probe both break up at basically the same time, as they both hit the atmosphere. Next up, Starlight 1. With the overwhelming success that was Destiny 2, I think it's about time we grab some research nodes. Mainly basic rocketry, engineering 101, and survivability. This will help prep for our future endeavors with Kerbals on the rockets. Make sure they survive and make sure that the rockets stay reliable. Now, we were considering getting some of the launch bases, but we kind of thought about how they would kind of be a waste, so we didn't go with those. So with those nodes unlocked, we have unlocked more parts, and we can develop more rockets. Now, let's develop the Starlight launch vehicle. But first, we need new contracts as we have completed our other two. First, we're going to challenge ourselves to orbit Kerbin. Now, while we have only been doing suborbital flights as of now, we feel like we can take on the challenge of finally getting something into orbit around Kerbin. Now, for the second contract, this was a bit harder to find because all the contracts were to either test something or haul tourists into orbit. And frankly, we don't want to haul tourists into orbit if we haven't proven our reliability in crewed flights. So, we should test something. But what should we test? Because if we want to test something, that will require a new whole launch vehicle. But we decided on this part in particular. Back to the hangar now. It's time we construct the next rocket, the Starlight rocket. The primary focus around this rocket is to incorporate the PSSM separator into the rocket. Now, first we tried to do it with the Destiny launch vehicle, and do it in Destiny 3. We couldn't find a way to fit it, so we decided on a new launch vehicle. And we decided on a new probe too, because it wouldn't fit with the current probe. Now, first we tried to incorporate the old design with the separator, so that way we wouldn't have to change much. But as we would soon learn, this really wouldn't work. The vehicle is only designed for internal payloads, and the payloads in question are not really meant to be separated, nor are they meant to be on the nodes exactly. But that's a problem because our primary focus for this launch is to test the decoupler and test the new probe as well. So we have to find a way to fit it. Of course, as we continue to explore options, we realize more and more that this kinda won't work. No matter how much effort we put into it, we cannot find a way to get all the parts together to work in a certain way. So it's with the, well, not really heavy heart, but with the decision of the higher-ups that we design a new rocket entirely from scratch. But we're only familiar with the Destiny launch vehicle and its components. Designing a new launch vehicle would be risky, but we like to take risks. We want to move through the stars, so we have to take risks. That's our only choice. So we decided to design a two-stage launch vehicle, with Mission Control having ambitious hopes that this could possibly be the one that makes orbit. They're currently planning Starlight 2 for the orbital attempt. So we put together the rocket and put all the pieces in place. make sure it fits in the fairing, and it looks all good from here. Then, Mission Control, well, not Mission Control, but the engineers make one tiny mistake. Not that. Of course, those retro rockets, or ullage motors, are kind of facing the wrong way, as we'll find out later. But here's the mistake. They clipped that decoupler, well, not decoupler, but launch clamp into the engine. Why would this be a mistake? Well, we'll soon find out, but for now, we're just finishing up on the rocket here. Finishing the coloration, making sure all the data can store 200 megabytes for good transmission back to Kerbin. And we're just coloring it to a sort of more silvery color. Just personal preference, mainly. But Starlight 2 looks good in construction. And with all looking good, the engineers get to go ahead to launch it. January 4th, 1960. After having launched Destiny 2, Mission Control is energetic to get Starlight 1 off the pad, and hopefully test the separation mechanism as well. After running system checks, battery checks, and all sorts of power checks and telemetry checks, Mission Control gives the go-ahead for the launch of Starlight 1. With Mission Control monitoring every single system at the same time. With Mission Control ready to execute the mission, the engine lights, and all of a sudden it veers almost 180 degrees after taking off and crashes right back on the pad, exploding into a fireball. Mission Control is disappointed, to say the least. After the failure that was Starlight 1, Photon Space Agency and the customer are disappointed, and so is the public, really. They expected the Photon Space Agency to do better and not rush things. Unfortunately, they didn't really do that. The customer is pretty disappointed, but is giving them a chance. Because they are a starting space agency, so it's expected that failures will happen. Well, can and will happen. But all we really need to do to fix Starlight 2 is move the launch clamps down and just rename the vessel. Because Starlight 2 is going to be accomplishing the same task that Starlight 1 was supposed to complete. Now, I do want to remind everyone that there is no reverting or quick saving in this, so if something fails, it fails for good. And I do want to mention that now we have Kerbal construction time. For the first 3 launches we didn't have that, but now we do. But that's besides the point. With Starlight 2 basically complete, it's about time that Mission Control and the engineers launch this vessel to hopefully a successful test. Good luck. January 14th, 1960. After completing construction and rolling out to the pad, Starlight 2 is ready for launch. And as expected, Starlight 2 prepares itself and successfully launches from the pad, to the relief of many engineers and the Mission Control team as well. So this footage is sped up by about 300%, I'm not sure. So it's way faster, as we all know how Ascent works, for suborbital things at least. And so the difference with this one is that Starlight needs to commit a roll program after launch to get its vernier thrusters to help with pitch control. And at certain points, at 600 meters a second and at 900 meters a second, the engines throttle down. But now with that out of the way, Mission Control decouples the payload, but doesn't complete the contract, as they missed the altitude window. And this disappoints the customer and Mission Control completely, as they haven't completed the contract. But they still are able to complete probe testing, which is a good thing at least. After reaching an apogee peak of 123,000 kilometers, or 123 kilometers, sorry, it expectedly comes back down from its apogee. Now, Mission Control isn't expecting this probe to survive, as the probe on Destiny did not, but they would soon be met with a surprise. The customer is disappointed that they didn't test it in time, but gives them one more chance to complete this contract. And the probe falls through the atmosphere and begins to suffer the effects of re-entry heating, and plasma blackout occurs. And all of a sudden, Mission Control gets signals back after re-entry, surprising them. And they realize that this probe has survived, albeit splashed down, and Mission Control does have an idea for the future. But for right now, Starlight 2 is complete. Now, due to the fact that Starlight 3 is meant to be the same thing as Starlight 2, just without the probe testing, we're going to skip through the between part and go right to the launch of Starlight 3. January 23rd, 1960, Starlight 3 sits on the pad, awaiting its launch. After making subsequent improvements to make sure that the separator separates on time, Mission Control is confident in this mission being the successful mission to test the separation mechanism. And as the engine ignites and the launch comes to release, Starlight 3 lifts off from the pad, and it commences its roll program. After commencing the roll program, it begins pitching downrange to get it on a path away from the pad and to get it on a path into a splashdown. The engine continues firing as the rocket continues going upwards. As the rocket approaches its 600 meters a second mark, it throttles down to about 66% as to compensate for the speed difference and to make sure we hit the speed limits and not go over or under. As we reach 900 meters a second, it throttles down to 33%. And after that throttle down, separation occurs, and the second stage throttles up for a little bit, then shuts off. And then, boom, separation and successful test. Mission Control celebrates the successful test of the separation motor, and the customer is happy. They have got their test, they've got their data, and now it's just another run-of-the-mill science-grabbing probe. So, the probe, as expected, just flies through space, grabbing as much science as it can for future endeavors and for Mission Control, and to unlock tech nodes, and as expected, reaches its 113-kilometer peak and comes right back down to Kerbin. With Mission Control expecting it to survive, they have planned recovery forces near the expected splashdown location. Mission Control continues receiving signal from the probe as it begins plunging through space towards the atmosphere. Closer and closer it gets. It hits the atmosphere and hits the upper atmosphere. And then gets closer and closer and closes in on the lower atmosphere. And then begins to suffer the effects of re-entry heating and plasma blackout. At this point, Mission Control loses, control of the satellite and can't really do anything about it. Then soon, they recover control of the satellite and see its splashdown location, its altitude, and whatnot. And recover forces on standby see a little loop in the nearby water, and they head to it to recover whatever remains, at least, of the probe. With Starlight 3 finally completing the contract, it's time for the first orbital launch attempt of the Photon Space Agency. Starlight 4. Hopefully to be a successful orbital launch attempt. After the great success that was Starlight 3, I think it's time we move on to Starlight 4. First, we're going to get us a new contract, as we've already done one of the two we already have. We're going to do a payload separation mechanism on Kerbin contract because that's easy, and frankly, all the other in-flight ones looked difficult to me, so testing something on Kerbin seems the easiest, plus we only need to build a ridiculously small vessel for it. Now, we have 27.7 science points, and Starlight 4 is already being constructed, so we're going to go to research and development and grab us some general rocketry so we can prepare for rockets in the future. But for right now, all the parts we have are suffice enough to do our launches. We have nothing else being planned at this moment, except with general rocketry needing to take about a day to research, which is no problem. I don't need everything in a day, so We were considering upgrading one of the buildings, but we thought it would be best to save the money for rocketry, and when we feel like we're in a safe position, we'll upgrade some of the buildings. Now, we did consider trying to do something in the administration building, like fundraising campaign or aggressive negotiations, but none of them were really calling out to me, and none of them were really necessary at the time. Of course, currently we have none running, so none are currently necessary. So we don't really need anything from the administration building. So we can just move on from the administration building. Because, again, nothing in there is useful to us. So we're just going to move along from the administration building and warp to when Starlight 4 is hopefully completed. It's now the dead of night, and Starlight 4 has finished its construction and is now in storage, and we're going to go ahead and roll out Starlight 4 to LC1 as it is ready for launch. So, with all things ready, it's time to launch Photon Space Agency's first orbital launch attempt. It is now February 2nd, 1960. Starlight 4 sits on the pad. Mission Control is ecstatic right now, awaiting for the launch of their first orbital launch attempt. With all systems go in Mission Control, the engines ignite, the launch clamps are released, and Starlight 4 lifts from the pad. As expected, it commits its roll program and commits its pitch program soon after. It pitches over, hoping for a 45-degree angle by 15 kilometers. Mission Control over time performs checks and shows nominal performance of Starlight 4 as it continues pitching over to its target. As the first stage begins to run dry, Mission Control expects for the first stage to throttle down, but unexpectedly it doesn't. This doesn't cause fear in anyone, as it's just a little bit of an offset to the trajectory, so it's just calculated for. And now, as the second stage begins to burn, one of the engineers notices something. They think that it won't make orbit. In fact, they think that there's not enough fuel. He calls us up to flight, and flight looks it over and calls the entire mission off, letting the second stage burn the rest of the way. All the flight controllers, the public, and the engineers are disappointed to hear this news. The stage commits its roll, thinking it's in an orbit, but unfortunately it isn't. And as the stage stays in the atmosphere, and as it comes back down through the atmosphere, Mission Control loses its signal, and it loses everything about the probe. The Photon Space Agency is starting to look untrustworthy and unreliable. The fate of the Photon Space Agency lies within their next few launches. If they aren't able to complete them successfully, then the Photon Space Agency may no longer exist. Hello everyone, thanks for watching this new series I'm trying to do. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe and like the video. And again, I can't stress this enough, this series has been inspired by N9 Gaming. His channel's in the description, please check him out. His series in RP1 is really good. His For All Kerbal Kind series is also pretty good, check them out. I hope to do more of this in the near future. And hopefully the episodes won't be as long as you saw today. Hopefully only 10 minutes with 2 launches in each. But that's about it. If you enjoyed, like, subscribe, share, whatever. But that's about it. I'll see you all in the next one. Goodbye.